Hi, Pascal. Hi, Sachin.
Oh, hey.
Hello.
Sorry for the last minute additions to the agenda. I should have posted that perhaps a bit earlier for folks. But I did write up a little something also in the spec repo, just recently, or just 5 minutes ago. It it's mainly around enum merging and some thoughts around that, and
A second. Who else is signing up? Is Martin coming? Do you know?
he has not told me that he's coming, but
Okay.
I can ping him, I suppose, just to double check.
Okay, I'm just. David, did you guys sign the spec membership agreement? Because the CLA has an issue, or did you use a new email address?
No, because usually we do it through Sergey. Today I forked it myself, but I actually don't know. I need to check with my employer whether I'm coming as an individual or through them.
Yeah, you can also sign as an individual, but yeah, it would be good if you check it for next time.
Should I answer the question? Are you paid for this? Then you come from an employer. If you
No, I'm not paid for this, so I guess I'll just sign up as an individual.
Yeah, it's.
Oh, one more time.
Oh,
Hey.
I thought the meeting was canceled. Sorry.
Sorry,
No.
I
I just was asking if you guys have topics. Otherwise, I would have canceled it.
Yeah, no, I was in another meeting and I just saw your message go by, so I sort of assumed
Yeah.
the outcome was that we would cancel, but
Sorry, I should have added it to the agenda earlier. So
I'll add myself to the agenda as well.
Yeah, I'm just adding Pascal.
Oh, thank you. You get used to that. Just have to be here.
Podcast. Okay, so let me just. Then we can get started. Okay. Sure. Okay. Okay, let's get started. Hey, everyone. Let me remind you that by being here, we all agree to the GraphQL Spec membership agreement, the participation guidelines, the contribution guide, and the code of conduct of the Linux Foundation. Meetings are published to YouTube, so if you're not comfortable with it, then you have to sign off. Also, we use LLMs and AI summary tools to create summaries of these meetings. Let's start with a quick round of introductions. My name is Michael.
Hi, I'm Pascal.
I'm Sachin from Apollo.
Hi, I'm Steven.
Hi, Steven.
David from Wondergraph.
Martin, also from Apollo.
Awesome. Then we have one topic today about something we started discussing, which is enum merging. And I leave that to you, Sachin.
Yeah. So from the talks from last week, I was thinking about it a bit more, and I had some concerns with the approach that was suggested a little bit, and also had some thoughts around a potential alternative that might alleviate at least some of the pain points uh, that exist today with some of the Apollo Enum merging rules. And so I tried to write that up into a spec issue. I think it's spec issue 202. I can also just link it in the Zoom, I suppose.
Yeah,
Sort
just
of,
share.
okay. Okay. Oh, maybe I can share. Sorry, 1 second. Let me. 1 second. Here it is. But yeah, I basically just tried to write up a little bit here. But to summarize, I guess, do folks need a refresher on what was discussed last week around this and the thoughts around that? I technically wasn't there for the meat of the conversation in the sense that I wasn't there at GraphQL and so I don't 100% know the idea being proposed. So it's me trying to sort of comment on a thing that I'm sort of hearing from last week.
Yeah.
But this is basically the concerns that I had with it, at least two of them. The first is that it's true that technically clients should be able to handle unknown enum values, but the experience around what a client should do next is confusing. Because if I see that in telemetry, and telemetry tells me, hey, there's an enum value I'm not handling, my first thought is, well, I should handle it in my app. So I go to look at the app to update it, and I look at the schema to see what the enum value means, and it's not there. So to me, that's a confusing experience because I don't know what to do next then. Is it a client error, meaning I should fix it, or is it a server error, meaning it's a server's problem, and it's up to the server to do something about it? So I guess the first thing is if we do go that route, it should probably be more clearly indicated it's a server error that also helps with telemetry so that it knows that it's not something the client is expected to fix. I guess that's one of the things if we go, through with that. The other point is that there are some customers who are not going to be happy with that particular approach. So it is just a note that it might work for some folks, but it may not work for others. So, it is nice as one who can simplify things, but it may not always generalize across all, the organizations. That's just another slight thing
Yep.
to
You,
note.
you could also end up inadvertently exposing information that shouldn't be exposed about a feature that's in development or like some kind of experiment.
Yeah. Well, in the intersection case, yeah, that's true. If you accidentally return an enum value that's not in the schema, that definitely would expose things that might not be intentionally meant to be exposed.
Yeah.
Yeah. At that point, you're also technically not a valid GraphQL server, so that's also not a great thing. Or like result coercion, you're not technically following the rules for it, which aren't great, but presumably, we're willing to change rules. So, but
Yes, and on that we talked like to Lee, and he says technically you are because like it's if it's in the process of coming into there, you anyway have to guard for these changes. And that's where we make the GraphQL spec a bit more clear on this.
yeah. But arguably that it's possible it could be in the process of it, but at that point, your schema introspection should indicate that it's there. Like it would be very strange if I
Yeah.
got an enum value from a server and I looked at introspection and it's just not there at all. That'll be a very confusing experience for the user. Because
Yeah.
at that point, like I don't know what's happening, right? I have no idea how to like proceed after that point. So it's more just like the client experience is confusing around that if we do allow that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between like clients being resilient, being able to handle like changes to the schema that have occurred after like their types have been generated, for instance. But that's different from a server actually returning results that are inconsistent with their current schema.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me it depends wholly on the premises. Is that a short-term a short-term confusion, if you want to say, in distributed systems that is acceptable? If there are a short-term, if there is a short state like this, but that is remedied, or is it like something where you intentionally switch it off, maybe even indefinitely, right?
Yeah, and that's a regular case because it's intersection. Like I don't necessarily think it's going to be short term. Like getting a enum value added to a bunch of subgraphs and like a multi-team setup, or like when you have like 100 teams, it takes a while sometimes. So I don't necessarily like the notion of short term is a very relative thing, I suppose. I don't want to necessarily try to cement like
Yeah.
what that is and like that kind of thing, or have a system that depends on that notion.
Yeah.
But short
And also the only reason we we sort of want that enum to be added to all those different subgraphs before we expose it is because we treat them as both input and output values. If they were output only, it would be fine for just a single subgraph to expose it.
Yes.
So that brings me to the other proposal I wanted to suggest here, which was an alternative. So for folks not familiar with Apollo's whole giant set of rules around how enum merging works, this is basically a summary. Really, it's only rules 3 to 6 that matter. The rest are inaccessible stuff. So it's only really this bit. But the gist is we look how the enum is used across subgraphs, whether it's used in at least a output position once, and if it's used in at least an input position once somewhere. And based on that, we use intersection, union, or exact match. That's like the one sentence summary of what it does. And the exact match is the particular pain point of this algorithm, because it means that once you've sort of tied yourself into this where you have both being used both positions, you can't easily evolve the enum anymore. Like if you want to add or remove a value, you're going to have a composition error if you do it naively. So you have to do this sort of rigmarole where you add an accessible to the enum value, then add it everywhere, and then remove an accessible. And similarly, if you do the removal, if you don't want to run into composition errors, and it's kind of a pain. So that's one of the pain points. And the other pain point is if you shift into a world where you had from like only input or only output usage to a both position usage, then all of a sudden you have to align your enums everywhere, where previously it might have just been union intersected. That's sort of the other pain point of the both positions logic here.
Yeah, it's suddenly that's also one of my major concerns, right?
Implicit, yeah.
Yeah.
So the suggestion here basically is to introduce a new sort of way to indicate for enum values whether they're used in just the input or just the output position, or whether they can only be seen in the input or only seen in the output. This would be a GraphQL spec thing specifically, and it would also help like just regular GraphQL servers, like not even thinking about composite schemas. I think this would probably help with other things because I think it is a somewhat commonish case where you have enums that are sort of the same but a bit different, and that one is using the input position and one is using the output position. And with this, you don't have to like keep those two things separate at all. Like that's the workaround that's been used everywhere, sort of having to do that. And that results in pain points in CodeGen because then you have to translate between the two enums and CodeGen, which is a pain. So it's nice if you can have this world where you have one enum and you can indicate for enum values whether it's input only or output only, and that gets validated during coercion. That's the gist of the feature if we added it to GraphQL. You can phrase it in different ways. It doesn't necessarily have to just be like two directives. You could have one directive with an enum value or some sort of enum in it. But those are arguing like the semantics of what the directive looks like. I don't really care too much about that, so I won't, go into that. But the gist is basically we have some way of indicating that an enum value is input only and some way of indicating it's output only. Whatever that way is, I don't mind too much.
And then we are not able to change it, or it's an explicit change, basically. So it's not just
the default basically is to assume it's output and input, right? So it's backwards compatible in that sense of the phrase, right?
No, that's interesting. So that means merging you would essentially do it based on this directive, right?
Yeah. So then this results in new merging rules, which eliminate the both positions case completely, basically. So that comes to the meat of it, which is this section here. So the idea is that you look for whatever subgraph whenever the enum is used in the output position. You essentially take the union of all those enum values, at least the non-input only enum values, right? And technically non-accessible, but that's given. And similarly, whenever you have any subgraphs that use enum in the input position, you take the intersection of their non-output only enum values, right? And call that set I, right? So it's two sets U and I. So if there are common elements in both U and I, they just go directly into the composed schema enum. There's no directives on them. For things that are only in U but not in I, then they have output only on them. And for things that are in I but not in U, they have input only on them.
But would we? Sorry, David, go ahead.
So my understanding is that the lack of a directive would mean what it means today, in that it's assumed it's being used as both. Is that right?
Correct.
But the problem with that is that the lack of the directive today, it could still only be used as an input or as an output. Like actually, you don't know, because all enums are treated equal, right? So it could actually be all input or it could actually be all output. So I'm not sure, because the lack of, like what I'm saying is the lack of directive is now explicitly expressing that it's both, which might not be the case, right? It could be that it's being used as an input only.
That's right. This essentially as part of this you would but the thing is you can't know, so I guess there's two things. So there's the position of where it's used, whether it's used in the like enum itself is used in a position of output and a position of input, so whether it's used in an argument or a field return type. And separate from that, there's whether an enum value is used or allowable in an input and whether an enum value is only seen in the output, right? And right now we have no information at all around whether enum value is only in the input, only in the output. We always basically assume, and I think
Yeah.
everyone assumes that it's both if it's for an enum and the enum is neither position, right?
I
Is that
suppose
Yeah,
what
that's what we actually discussed also last time, that there is a missing intent here.
yeah.
Mhm.
And like
And
if we
bit-
want to go in this way. Yeah, go ahead, Pascal.
and it's more flexible. I remember Martin or Stephen, I don't know which one of you brought it up, but months ago when we discussed this the 17th time, now we're in the 25th iteration of this discussion, but no, it once came up that we marked the enum as this is an input only enum and this is an output only enum, so that if you want, you can actually discourage the use in your schema as shared enums because you will always run into issues with them in the long run. Now, this goes into a similar direction, but I think it's a lot more flexible because it's value based.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's because the thing is having two enums when they sort of represent the same thing is just very clunky for both the user and the server, right? In the sense of like, if you have two separate enums that have to represent an output and input, but they sort of contain the same thing, whenever you have to convert between the two on the user side, it's just very annoying to have to like do that manual conversion between enum values, right? So this allows us to sort of avoid some of that at least, to that extent. Or at least it allows it to be more clear about the intent of it, right? That this thing only has some values that work in some cases and not in others, right? And so the conversion at least becomes automatic, or can be made automatically.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the nice part of this. It also sort of means you can collapse two enums basically into one. I suppose that's the other thing, right? So like if you have an input enum and output enum, you no longer need to write them separately. But sorry, David, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so to be clear, like I really like the idea. I think this solves a lot of problems. But again, I think so if you imagine a company with like a huge number of enums and they're all unlabeled, like both none of them have directives, they're implicitly going to be understood to be both input and output, which I believe would then mean that the definition would have to be consistent, right?
But that's the
we would
case.
ideally want them to.
Yeah,
I know Pascal has said here pre-processor, so something I guess that runs through and then checks, is it only input, is it only output, and
Well,
then
that's just the composition setting, right? So you can very easily emulate what Apollo is doing right now, just as a composition flag, because we explicitly state in the composite schema specification that there is a pre-processing step where things can happen depending on whatever you want to do. So we keep this. I think we even specified it, right, Michael? There is an official pre-processing step because there's many things that we want to put in there. For example, the copying of the shareable, this special shareable behavior that when you annotate shareable on top of an object type, it actually inherits onto the fields, but only on this subgraph and yada, yada, yada. These are all preprocessor stuff. This is all preprocessor stuff. You don't need to have this in the composition. This can all happen before the composition even happens. And this goes into the same direction. If you want to have the same behavior, it's essentially a flag in the composition to enable a preprocessor. And if I understand you correctly, Zashin, you actually want to go a step further than just adding this to the composite schema specification. You are talking about a potential graphical specification, like proper graphical specification
Yes.
that you can define this is input or output only.
That's right. That's right. Because the thing is, like, you can almost derive like whether an enum type is used in a position of input or output based on like its usages in the schema, but you can't know about enum values at all. Like you have the information that there's no way to communicate that at all today in the GraphQL spec. And we've always based everything has to basically assume then that if an enum value is in that and it's in both positions, it has to be usable in both positions. But that might not necessarily be true is the thing.
Do you have a good example of this where you would have a shared enum which has enum values which are unidirectional?
So it can happen sometimes for deprecated things. So if you have a deprecated enum value and you're like wanting to change the name of something, right? In that case, it's going to be input only a lot of the time because internally you'll do a translation layer where you'll change it to like whatever the new name should be, right? So suppose you have a deprecated input name, right? That could be a case of input only, right? And the output only is a more that specifically it can help the case where you have a thing where you don't want, because the thing about output only that's nice is that that means you don't have to add it to all your subgraphs. You only have to add it to one of them, and you don't have to add it to all the other ones. And it'll appear as output only in the compose schema enum, so it'll still be there, and that sort of helps address that case at least, if that makes sense. David, your hand up again.
Yeah, so would it be fair to say that the lack of the directive is more of a like composition, you handle this and then give me an error if I'm wrong or if something doesn't work out. Like you're rather than explicitly expressing input only or output only, you're effectively letting composition do its thing. And then if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're not, then it's fine. Is that kind of the gist?
If you, so I mean, sorry for like nitpicking here. If you hand no in this thing, I think if you hand no directive to the composition, it means it's in both places.
Correct. If there's no input only and no output only on an enum value, composition will essentially mean to assume that there's no restriction on the enum value. That is to say that if it sees the enum used in both positions, the enum value can appear for both positions.
And then it's the equal semantics that we want, right? Or that we
Strictly equal.
Yeah, strictly equal.
Well,
So then what we're asking people is to use these directive if they want something different from
that's the other
that
thing.
default behavior.
That's a little something that's also a little tricky. Like if you look at this specifically, there's nowhere where that sort of exactly equal semantic comes into play, right? So like consider the case of where there's no input only and no output only, right? And suppose it's used in both positions. What's going to happen here is both you and I will have it, right? Potentially. I might not have it if it's not present in some of the subgraphs. But if it's present in all the subgraphs, it's going to be in both you and I, and then it just goes in here without anything on it, right? And if it's only used in one of them, suppose example that you have multiple subgraphs, and this particular enum value is only in one of them, right? And it's used in the input position, it's used in the input position in only one of them, but there are other ones where it's used in input position where it's not in them. Then it's going to not be an I, but will be an U. In which case that it'll be marked output only in that case. And if someone tries to use it as input, the server will then validate and reject that when it does this thing for input coercion.
So forgive my ignorance here, but then this doesn't sound to be backwards compatible, because if you imagine someone has an enum in one graph, which is input only, and someone has a subset of that enum in another graph, also input only, but say has one enum value less than the other, that would be flagged by composition as your intention here is that they're used as both, and it would not allow you to merge because they're not consistent. But actually, they're only used as input, and it could be inferred by composition that they're only used as input. But because of the lack of directive, they're being inferred as used as both. So that isn't actually, yeah.
But that is a compatibility setting for the composition.
The preprocessor.
Like Apollo Federation, when you move from V1 to V2, you have also like breaking changes, and that would be just to handle the same way.
When you migrate from stitching to federation, you have breaking changes.
Yeah. This definitely would be a change of behavior between these two settings. Like if you went from this world to this world, you would potentially have a different enum output. But you will have less errors than you would before because your scheme would be assuming that your router can represent output only, input only. You would have less errors than before, and it wouldn't break anything like query wise, I believe. Like if a query succeeded again this world against a router that used these rules, it should still presumably work in this world. The only thing is that some errors that were composition errors will now be runtime errors. That is the one caveat. They will be like input coercion errors. So that's the one caveat to it. I can write that up more specifically because I think that's maybe a little more confusing. I didn't have to write all this up. So, but yeah, because there's a compatibility story to be had here. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it's good. It's a good entry into the discussion. Like I have to read through it after the meeting also. Again.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I think we all like the idea of
Yeah.
like directives on individual enum values, right? To
yeah, I
make
find it a very
explicit.
interesting idea. When I thought about it, I was always thinking about flagging the actual enum, right? But I never thought about doing it on the value level. Really interesting.
It
Yeah.
eliminates all the duplication that people have to do currently, which is nice. Like I very much don't like when people have to like copy paste like descriptions of enum values and the exact enum value strings between their enums because they're the same but kind of not the same. So it's like, you know, this sort of eliminates that, and that's something I've sort of wanted for a bit, but or at least
Yeah.
to simplify that. So
Have
but
you seen that in practice? Like enum, like
Yeah.
where you have two almost identical enums?
yeah, people will just like copy paste their enum between them to like avoid issues with like intersection union. Sometimes
Oh, because of the Apollo merging
behavior.
rules.
But also
I
just because like it's easier to evolve them if you do it that way. Like if you want
The-
something
the- the-
output only, then you can do it output only and it just works. Because like once you add something to the output, then you have to say, well, all my things that have it in the input position also have to accept it as input, and that becomes kind of annoying then, right? Because I don't want to actually do that a lot of the time. Like it might be the case that I start outputting something doesn't mean that all the fields that take it as input now need to figure out how to do it as input. So this allows you to sort of not have to worry about that by marking it as output only, because then it'll explicitly validate that. So
Yeah, that's why I was gravitating to intersection, because like it feels so strange that you have to duplicate your enum in that way to avoid the issue that it becomes so unpredictable. David?
It might be in the document. I've not had a chance to read through it properly yet. But if you have a discrepancy in the directives across graphs, is it like the hierarchy that if it's none, it's being treated as none. If it's input in one, output in the other, it'll be treated as output, or like how will that work?
that should generally be fine because the thing about input and only and output only is it's relative to the subgraph, right? So like output only just means that for fields that return that enum in that subgraph, that it's only going to be that the enum value should only appear there, at least for when it queries those fields. So it's okay if they differ between subgraphs. This algorithm too might be the simplest way to sort of understand it. Like in that case, you're just it's a combination of is it used in the input position and is it not doesn't have not output only on it. And that's when it basically is seen as potentially being in the input. And then vice versa for the output case. If it's used in the output position, it does not have not input only on it, then it's a viable candidate for something that could be in the output for that subgraph.
I think we all need to read this
I think
and
Yeah.
we
think
need,
about it.
Yeah.
we need the examples in all different combinations to see how the effect is.
Yeah. Let's read through it and flesh it out a bit with examples, and then. But I like the general direction.
Yeah. Very much so.
Yeah, we've always been somewhat unwilling to change GraphQL spec on the Apollo side, I think, or we've been a little hesitant to do so because it's always a bit of a you know, it takes effort and a lot of time, but I think we're more willing to do that here at least. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the
Addressing a clear pain point.
GraphQL spec is just a text document. It's very easy to change. To get a change to be approved is very hard.
It takes a year, but I mean, we can take it. Let's fix it first in the composite schema spec. When we have a clear idea on that, we can try to push it in the core spec, which is then much easier once we established.
It also, this would be a new kind of directive, right?
yeah, like deprecated, basically.
Yeah.
Deprecated is a directive that
Yeah.
appears in schemas and also appears in introspection. This is of a similar nature where
Well,
it's there and it appears there. It also has a validation.
well, we have a few of them. We have
Yeah.
a few of them. Correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but one of is also part of the introspection, right?
Which one?
Oh yeah, one off.
Yeah, it's not. It's not. These directives in general, runoff, for instance, or deprecated are not actual directives, right? They are in the SDL represented as the directive, but they are properties of the type system.
Mhm.
Yeah, but the comparison with one-off is interesting because it adds constraints to the existing
Exactly.
Yeah,
schema, and this is similar in that way.
Yeah.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah, it's a property of the type system member in this case, the enum value, which says, okay, this can only be on the input side. Awesome. Do we have anything else that people want to discuss?
I think this is plenty to think about.
Yeah.
Oh.
Really appreciate it, because that's a completely new way of looking at the problem, because we are running in circles since a while, and there's the
Yeah.
Apollo the Apollo approach guys, and we don't like the Apollo approach guys, and
Yeah.
then there's actually everything is bad guys. So now we have a new fresh idea. That's great.
Yeah.
Let's put this right on the agenda next week. Then we can think about it a bit more, and that maybe we're all in the Slack, right? Maybe we can.
Yeah, I'm posting it right now that people read this
ping
through.
pong a
Yeah.
few, like write down a few examples yourself with the enum, and try to understand what Sachin has written, and then we can ping pong a few messages back and forth to see how this works.
Yeah, or on the issue, like depending on
Oh yeah,
like
sure.
how fleshed out the ideas are, but it might be good to keep it like public.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. The Slack is public. Everyone can join. They just need to ask.
Yeah.
I'll go extra steps. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I posted to Slack, so
Um,
everybody else can also chime in.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Great.
And we can conclude and see you guys next week.
Yeah. See you next week.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.